Hi everyone. If we have not met before, my name is Sydney Kraviak and I'm the Program and Outreach Coordinator for adult programs here at the library. I have a few notes before we begin. This program was originally planned for May of 2020. As you guys know, a few things have happened between here and there, so we're very excited to be able to have it and to have Bryan with us this evening. Some other things about local history that are currently happening at the library. Out in the lobby and upstairs, we have a history of farming in Peters Township, like Trax Farms display that Margaret of our local history room worked really hard to put together. So if you haven't had a chance to see that yet, make sure you do. It'll only be up for a little bit longer. Coming in September, Margaret and another staff member, Carrie, solicited information from the public, from you guys, about your memories of the dairy bar. So we have a dairy bar program coming up September 29th. That will be via Zoom. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. We don't have a registration available quite yet, but we'll make sure. We have posters and flyers and emails, and everyone will hear about it some way. And then next Saturday, we are bringing back Read Local, Eat Local to Peters Township Public Library. So out in the parking lot, we'll have some event tents. We will have 22 local authors and 3 food trucks out there. So this is time for you to come meet some local authors, maybe buy some of their books, maybe buy some food. Starting the event at 10 a.m., J.D. Barker. He writes thrillers and has published with James Patterson. They've done 2 books together now. So he'll be doing an author talk. And then we'll have the rest of the local authors here from 11 to 1. And then if anyone themselves has published or is interested in writing, at a little after 1 o'clock, 1:15, Riverstone Books will actually be giving a talk about how they work with local authors to help promote their books. Now, while you are all here tonight we have Bryan Seip. He is the president of the Montour Railroad Historical Society and a volunteer with the Montour Trail Council and the Dare Model Railroad Club, here to talk to us about the history of the Montour Railroad. Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney, and thanks for everybody for coming out. She mentioned that this program was supposed to be done a couple years ago, actually, and because of COVID, we had to cancel it. Well, we still have a little bit of COVID hanging into us. Wayne Frimmer is the president of the local Peters Township Friends of the Montour Trail Group. He was supposed to be here tonight to give a little bit of talk about the trail before we get into the railroad/trail. And he doesn't have COVID, but he was in contact with some people that do, so right now he's in quarantine. So I get to do his part as well as our part. So as far as basically the background for the trail in Peters, in 1985, Peters Township purchased 100 acres of abandoned railway right-of-way from the Montour Railroad. And this was the first section that was converted from railroad to a hiking and biking trail, and it's become a great asset for the community. 1989, a meeting of 15 people interested in rail trails formed the Montour Trail Council, and it has now grown to over 2,000 supporting members. In 91, the council purchased 38 miles of the Montour Railroad right-of-way. This was deeded property that the railroad owned in order to run their railroad. 92 saw the opening of the first Montour Trail sections. It was 4 miles of trail was opened up in Cecil Township. At the present, there's 47 miles have been pieced together by hundreds of volunteers, and they use donated membership funds, as well as federal, state, and local grants, and private foundation grants. There are 7 friends groups responsible for local trail maintenance and repair. They do mowing, trimming, tree removal, and it's basically there's one group in each of the townships that the trail passes through. So the Peters Friends take care of the non-paved sections within the township. And more information on the Peters group can be obtained at petersfriends@montourtrail.org. Now, moving ahead a little bit for the Historical Society and my personal involvement in them. I've been a railroad fan all my life. In 2001, an online discussion group was formed, and it called itself the Montour Railroad Historical Society. It was formed to share stories, pictures, and information about the Montour Railroad. Members participated from all over the country because we were online, and even from around the world. There were a few members that lived outside the U.S. And this is now, it started out as a Yahoo group, and it morphed into one of the other groups, and we're now onto a Facebook page. So it is available on Facebook if you want to get into Montour Railroad Historical Society and get into it from that end. 2008 saw a group of local members from that discussion group formed a group to preserve and present the history of the Montour Railroad with the artifacts and information located along the Montour Trail. So the Historical Society became a friends group of the Montour Trail Council. Instead of one section, like I said, each friends group has a piece of one township, we cover the whole trail. So we've got 50 miles worth to do. In August of 2008, the Historical Society acquired the X1 crane from the Ohio Central Railroad. It was being sold at the time, and this was due to be scrapped. This crane was originally purchased and worked on the Montour. It came in 1946. And it was sitting idle in Denison, Ohio, because it had been broken down for years. And thanks to the Century Steel erectors, who are also the ones that built the bridge up at Hal's Cafe, if you're on the trail, and the Tom Robinson family, who gave us a spot to locate this crane, it was moved back to home territory, and it was placed beside the Montour Trail for a cosmetic restoration. Another one of our early projects saw a refurbishing of the signal tower in Coraopolis at Trail Mile 0.5 in early 2009. But the Historical Society is probably best known for the interpretive signs that are placed along the trail to inform trail patrons of the history of the railroad and the mines and the industries that it served. There are currently 39 signs along the trail, with more on our to-do list. Any questions so far? Yes. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
How was it named the Montour?
The railroad basically follows Montour Run.
And Montour was the railroad name?
Montour was the railroad's name, yeah. Montour Run Creek runs actually from up near Imperial down to Coraopolis, and it goes into the Ohio River. And the first section of the railroad was built basically from Coraopolis, where they were loading coal onto barges, up to Imperial. So that was, and it followed the Montour Run Valley up through that whole section. So that was, they came up with, it ran by the Montour, so it was named for the Montour. Yes. The crane is parked over here just off of Valley Brook Road at TAR Storage, Tom Robinson's storage place. It sits beside the trail. It's at mile 30 on the trail. There's a caboose there that came from the parent company of the Montour, and then the crane sits beside it now. For
I understand you can tour that museum.
oh, I don't know.
We have the Cecil Township Historical Society would love to see if we could tour that. But I haven't been able to get a hold of anybody to see if that's possible.
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately.
But
Yeah.
his name's Tom Robinson.
Tom Robinson, yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Just
Oh, is it?
walking on that trail here,
Right?
Brush Run,
Right?
that hill's too steep.
No,
You saying that the train went over Brush Run there? It seems to me that it was over to the right of that or something. You know,
the answer will be revealed shortly. That's in the presentation, so yeah. Spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you right now, so yeah, okay. Anything else? All right, let's move to the Montour Railroad in Peters Township. So a little background history. Montour Railroad was organized in 1887 and began operations hauling coal in 1889. But its history in Peters Township didn't start until 1913. Now this picture is, you might have seen this upstairs, this picture is from the 1920s or 30s, and it shows a coal train eastbound through the township. This picture is taking, you're standing on the hill above Thomas Road looking north. So this is Thomas Road here. This is Valley Brook Road coming down here, or I'm sorry, McMurray Road. Valley Brook Road is on the other side of the railroad, back in this section. And over in right here is where Dairy Bar, Heisler Market, that is, the McMurray underpass would have been right here. So this is, as you can see, not much development in Peters Township in that particular days. In 1913 and 14, Montour took on a massive building project to extend the railroad 34 miles from Imperial to West Mifflin. At that point, it was only 10 miles long from Coriopolis up to Imperial. So they added 34 miles to reach other railroads that they could interchange with in West Mifflin. This opened service to several new coal mines along this route, including Montour No. 4 in Peters Township. Montour 4 was the most prolific coal producer on the Montour. No? Well, okay, yes. Across Chartiers Creek, where there's a couple buildings, that was the original shaft before it was actually Montour 4, and that was used as a entry for men and supplies to come in and out of the mine. And then in 1914, they dug the shaft further down Valley Brook, and that's where, from that point, that's where the coal came out. So coal out of one side and men and supplies out of the other. A lot of the mines in this area were built similar to that, with two different shafts to handle the different aspects of mining. Many days at No. 4 saw over 100 cars loaded with coal. It took 3 or 4 full trains to ship coal out of the mine. Montour 4 was one of the busiest places on the railroad. They shipped coal for 66 years, and it only ended when a catastrophic flooding of the mine caused a sudden closure in August of 1980. They punched through into another old mine that was filled with water. They filled the mine up with water, and they couldn't keep up with the pumps. They determined that there were only, depending who you talk to, supposedly only 5 or 6 years of coal left in Montour 4, so they decided that it wasn't worth the cost to try and reopen it, and they shut it down. So the mine was abandoned, and they had concrete pumped in to permanently seal the shaft. Now, the railroad continued operations through the township until the end of 1980. This was the last train, December 26th, heading to Brookside Lumber in Bethel Park to pick up some empty cars. The railroad in Peters was then abandoned. The township purchased 100 acres of railroad within the township in 1985. With the help of state funds, the first phase was developed as a recreational multi-use trail, as well as to preserve and reinstate the natural surroundings with native trees and wildflowers. This was the first section of the railroad to be repurposed as a hiking and biking trail. It was named the Arrowhead Trail by the township. When the Montour Trail Council was formed 4 years later, an agreement was made with the township to include the Arrowhead portion as a part of the larger Montour Trail system. With the aid of a grant, the original section of the Arrowhead Trail was resurfaced in 2002. The Arrowhead Trail paved section runs 3.5 to 4 miles from Route 19 to Brush Run Road, and it's maintained by the township. The other 3 non-paved sections are maintained under a working agreement with the Montour Trail Council, and the entire trail surface in Peters is part of the Montour Trail system. So now we can start our little tour. The railroad was basically constructed from west to east, so we'll take that same route. The railroad entered Peters Township over the Chartiers Creek Bridge. It 270 feet in length. It's the third longest bridge on the Montour. The McDonald Viaduct and the Library Viaducts are longer than this bridge. It's made up of 3 spans of 90 feet each, sitting on concrete piers, and it had a wooden deck to hold the rails. After sitting idle for over 25 years, in 2008, the Montour Trail Council had a concrete deck poured on the bridge to carry traffic into the newly opened section of the trail in Peters Township. Coming off the bridge, you immediately enter Greer's Tunnel, going through the ridge carrying Hidden Valley Road. At 235 feet, it's the shortest of the 4 tunnels that were bored on the Montour. When it was built in 1913, its portals and liner were made of wood. In 1922, concrete portals and liner were added. So thus, the date stamped in the concrete at the entrances reads 1922, although at that time the tunnel was actually 9 years old. Exiting the tunnel, you cross a steel through-truss bridge over another railroad. Through-truss, such called because, as you can see, it makes a box fare with this ironwork. The train passes through the bridge. The railroad it crosses over was built before the Montour, and it goes through the ridge and over Chartiers Creek on its own tunnel and bridge. It's still active, and it's operated by the Pittsburgh and Ohio Central Railroad. The Montour Railroad ran along the hillside as it wound along the edge of the Chartiers Creek Valley, and after about a half a mile, a few hundred yards before a road crossing, you pass mile marker 31. This is one of the original markers set by the railroad when it was constructed. This was done over a century ago, and it's notable by the white number on the black plate and post. It measured the distance from the Montour connection with the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad in Coriopolis. A few hundred yards away is the Montour Trail milepost. They don't match up with the Montour Railroad markers because they use a different starting point, and some realignments that were done in the right-of-way for the railroad changed the actual distance. So it shortened up the railroad a bit, but the original mileposts were never reset and never changed. After crossing Buckeye Street, the railroad continued along the hillside toward Valley Brook Road. And this section of the trail remains much as it was during the life of the railroad, and as you can see, with no development along this section. If you approach Valley Brook Road, you pass through Camp's Cut, named after the family which owned the land when the railroad was constructed. The cut is curved, and the train engineers could not see a nearby switch heading into the mine on the other side of Valley Brook Road. So thus signal lights were mounted on 2 poles to show the engineer whether the switch was set for the main track, as this green signal shows, or diverging into the mine yard, as indicated by a red signal. When these were set up, this was before radio communications, and the engineer had to rely on visual signals from the brakeman and the conductor and to when and where to stop the train. So if he couldn't see around the curve, then he had to have a way to figure out which way this switch was set. And he could watch the lights, and he would see if it changed from green to red, then he would know that the conductor had thrown the switch and he could advance into the mine. Railroad then crossed over Valley Brook Road as it entered the site of Montour Mine number 4. Part of this bridge is still in use, this span right here that goes over Brush Run Creek. This span was removed because it was too low and several trucks lost their tops going through there. And then it was replaced with a steel bridge. Further down, yes. In Cecil, I might add, yes. Just off that bridge, over Valley Brook, was the railroad switch for the loaded yard of number 4. And this was the switch that was connected to the signals in Camp's Cut. So if the train went, quote, straight, it goes around this bend up here, obviously, but that was the main line. If it went into the yard, you can see this is loaded hopper cars of coal waiting to be picked up and taken away. And during the winter weather, track gangs would be tasked with keeping the switches clear of snow and ice to prevent derailments. The snow and ice would pack up between the rails, and when you threw the switch, sometimes it wouldn't close all the way. And just like closing your garage door. And if it didn't close all the way, you ended up with a train on the ground. Further down, as you round the curve, a phone booth stood beside the main line. This gave the train crews communications with the dispatcher at Montour Junction. It was used until radios came into being in the early 1970s. Phone booths were at locations where the trains would be working onto or off of the main line, and it allowed the train's conductor to obtain permission from the dispatcher to occupy a section of the main line, protecting it from other trains on the single track. There were close to 50 phone booths over the length of the Montour, and they were all networked down to the dispatcher in Coriopolis, is where the offices were. And it had the old magneto, crank the phone, ring the bell type of things, and you would crank it up and it would ring at the other end, and the dispatcher would pick it up and the conductor would be able to talk to him. On the hillside, opposite about where that phone booth was, there's footings for a water tank that was used to supply steam locomotives. It's up on the edge of the bank. There's a picnic table there and an informational sign, so you can find it. Here's a picture of the sign and up on the hillside behind. Rather than a traditional spout on a tank like you see in most pictures, this was a wooden tank, but it fed a water column that was located beside the main tracks. Along that hillside, there are remnants of another right-of-way. And this was the track that was known as Hill's Transfer. Loaded and empty cars of coal and other freight were exchanged between the Montour and the Pennsylvania railroads. Where it ran beside the Montour main line, it was one track. Here's the main line with some empty cars sitting on it. Here's the transfer track. As you can see, these are non-coal. The tank car, a gondola, box car, these could have been going to other industries along the Montour. These tracks over here, this is the loaded yard, as you can see, with the loaded cars coming out of Montour number 4. Further down along the hillside, as it diverged away from the main line, it became 2 tracks so that they could store more cars and bring cars in and out. It met the Pennsylvania Railroad near the edge of the current Frosty Valley Golf Course. The Montour switch was located near the spot where the caboose and X1 crane now sit. This tipple building is where the red brick garage of Tom Robinson sits. The other building across from it is this building here, it's the hoist house. And right about, and this is here's the switch, right about where these cars are sitting is where the crane and the caboose are now located. The tipple building and the shaft for Montour 4 were sited at this spot. The building nearest the creek, this one, is still there. That was the original hoist house for the mine. And a vertical shaft was dug next to it, served by this elevator. And the mine opened in 1914. The large tipple building was built to receive coal from the mine, sort it, clean it, and load it into rail cars. That lasted until 1953, when a new shaft, portal, and tipple were built, and this was used until the mine was closed in 1980. So here's the original shaft, the hoist house. This was a aerial tramway that ran up onto the hillside over here to dump slate and impurities. So here's the new tipple over the tracks. This is the main line, now the trail, and the conveyor belt went over to the hillside over here, and then sloped down at an angle down to the mine below. As you go around the next curve, the open area was the empty yard. And several tracks could hold empty hoppers awaiting loading at the tipple. Notice that the empty yard and the loaded yard on the far side of the tipple ran at a gentle slope. So when you walk along the trail, you can see that it slowly has a little bit of a slope to it. This was designed so that the hopper cars could be moved by gravity into and then beyond the loading tipple, and thus no locomotives would be needed when they were loading the coal from the mines. Locomotives were only needed to deliver the cars and to take them away. The switch to access the empty yard was located just before the next bridge, which crossed over Valley Brook Road. Here's the switch stand. The switch was just off the bridge. This is now a trail bridge over Valley Brook Road. For the trail people that know, this is one called VB2. Here's the head of a line of empty cars. They're sitting in the empty yard. When the railroad was built, Valley Brook was just a dirt road. It was paved later, and then after the railroad was abandoned, realigned again in the 1980s to give it its current configuration. So after you cross Valley Brook Road, the railroad entered a short cut in the hillside and crossed yet another bridge over Brush Run. Here's the bridge over Brush Run. This is Route 19 up here. And down in behind this hillside is where the sanitation plant is now located. This bridge was built before the sanitation plant existed, and the concrete abutment for the bridge can still be seen near the top of the current trail bridge. This is the steel trail bridge that comes out of the parking lot. Here's the concrete abutment, and when you look at the bridge, that's the same abutment on this side. Here's the sanitation plant just as it was being built when the bridge was being removed. Now this parking lot here is where the paved portion known as the Arrowhead Trail picks up, and it runs through the township. Another crossing of the creek is made at the far west end of the now St. Petersburg Center parking area. So this is from the other side. Here's again is Route 19. This is Route 19 up here from the Cecil side, if you will. This is where the paved passing storage siding known as Thompsonville siding was added at this point. The railroad was double tracked for the next half mile. So extra cars going to or from number 4 would not fit into the mine yards, but could be stored here until space opened up at the mine, or they were picked up by another train and taken away. So this is from the St. Petersburg Center side. Again, this bridge is still here with the trail, Route 19. This is Valley Brook Road along here. This is the old Valley Brook Road ramp coming down from Route 19. And this overhead bridge was the Pittsburgh Railway's interurban trolley line that ran from Pittsburgh to Canonsburg and then all the way down to Washington. And it was in existence. That rail line, the trolley line, operated until 1953. So that dates this picture as a little bit before 53. Now if you go a little further down, if you use the trail at the Pelopets Road access, you note that the bridge there is 2 tracks wide. So that's the other end of this Thompsonville siding. The track nearest the hillside was the main line. The track nearest the creek was the Thompsonville siding. A few hundred yards east of that bridge was the end of the siding, and the Montour became 1 track again. A little further down on the south side of the trail, there are some concrete footings found along the trail's edge. This is the access trail that's going up into the new Rolling Hills Park up on the hillside, but here's footers, central column post. There's 2 other footers for the Fife water tank. It was a large steel tank, and around 1917, plans were made to establish a locomotive servicing facility at this point. The nearest facilities were at Montour Junction, which was over 30 miles away, or at Mifflin Junction, which was 15 miles to the east. Those plans never came to fruition, and the Fife tank was eventually dismantled. Next along the line was the infamous, at least to Montour Railroaders, turkey farm. It was located across the creek from the current Washington Federal Savings Bank. It's now an empty lot, but you may recall a house and buildings on that site up until several years ago, until they were torn down. So this scene shows a coal hopper which derailed and rolled onto its side, spilling its load along the hillside. Driveway came up from the current Brush Run veterinary lot, it's still there, and crossed the railroad. So that was a convenient access point for railroad crews working with high rail maintenance vehicles to set onto or off of the tracks. This scene shows a track gang posing for a picture as they were replacing ties in the area in the late 1970s. Everything was done by hand on the Montour. This scene shows a weed sprayer truck that had been working along the railroad. After leaving the rails to fill up with water, the driver missed the rails when trying to set back on a turkey farm, and he almost rolled the truck into the ditch. Hard to see, but there's some chains here and here that are fastened to the truck and to the rails to keep it from rolling over further and going down into the ditch. And P.S., the 2 guys in the picture are Montour employees who were on the job, but neither one of them were the driver. A high rail crane had to be dispatched, and it was seen crossing Valley Brook Road on its way to clear up the incident. So they couldn't just pull it up. Those of you that watch Highway Through Hell and Rescue 401 and some of those shows, they had to bring in the big guy. Oh my, yeah, a rotator, exactly. Then the railroad crossed over McMurray Road on a short steel bridge. The roadway under the bridge was only 24 feet wide, 2-lane. When the intersection was reconfigured, a new concrete bridge 110 feet long replaced the original bridge. The railroad also serviced McMurray Supply, which was a lumber supply and home coal delivery business. It had its own spur tracks that went off the main line here. The Cobb Collection and the office buildings next door, when you go down Valley Brook Road, was originally the McMurray Supply. Next point of interest as we proceed down Valley Brook Road is the big brick farmhouse near the Bebop Road intersection. This house was not built by the railroad, but it was bought in the 19-teens to house the foreman of the section track gang. Across from this house, concrete slabs still exist where a tool house was located. Similar to this one, tool house, in fact, this is an ex-Montour tool shed. It's over at the Age of Steam Roundhouse in Ohio right now. Similar to this tool house, it held track tools and supplies such as spikes, tie plates, joiner bars, and other items that were needed. And it also housed a speeder car that was used by the track section crews. The railroad crossed Bebop Road over a concrete arch bridge. This narrow and low underpass prevented large trucks from using the road. And in 2012, so that's actually 10 years ago now, wow, it was demolished and replaced with a 144-foot steel beam bridge. Montour ran further through the township along the edge of what became Peters Park until it crossed Sugar Camp Road. This was another concrete arch bridge with limited clearances. It was also raised and replaced by a longer concrete bridge in 2012. These were township projects, and this section of the trail is part of the township maintained Arrowhead Trail. Montour's original main line ran through the Milton Douglas farm, which is now the Emperor's Arabian Horse Farm and into a cut crossing under Brush Run Road. When the railroad was built in 1913, a steel bridge with a wooden plank deck carried Brush Run Road over the railroad. After the railroad was abandoned, the aging bridge was taken out and the cut was filled in up to the road level. So thus the trail now goes up an earthen ramp on one side, crosses the road, and then goes back down the ramp on the other side to the original railroad level. So there's your answer for the Brush Run
You
Bridge.
can tell it's too steep for the train.
Yeah. The right-of-way traveled along the hillside toward McMurray Road along what the railroaders called Rocky Ridge. And this was empty farmland through most of the life of the railroad. But now this picture is basically taken from McMurray Road looking across. Now that entire valley is filled with houses. And this was the original main line of the Montour Railroad. And that's the railroad milepost 37 is evident as it left Peters Township and crossed into Bethel Park. So what is the Bethel Park branch of the trail was actually the main line of the Montour Railroad. The Montour ran through Bethel Park to a connection with other railroads in West Mifflin at Mifflin Junction. So now let's back up a little bit, actually move forward on the construction timeline. And the previously mentioned Milton Douglas Farm along Sugar Camp Road, a new branch was constructed in 1918, went 2 miles down the hill into South Park Township and accessed the then new Montour No. 10 mine and library. A wide track arrangement was built at the new library junction. This allowed trains to or from No. 10 to go in either direction, east or westbound. So as you can see the directions marked here, a Y is basically a triangle, or it's like a Y with a slash across the top if you want to look at it that way. Trains to or from the library mine come up. If they were being sent to Champion for cleaning, they could go west out through Cecil Township and go out to Champion at Imperial. If they were going to West Mifflin and being shipped that way, they could go up the other lane. The east led to Mifflin Junction, deliveries to and from the Union Railroad. And the Union Railroad at that point also connected with the Bessemer and Lake Erie. So a lot of Montour coal ended up on the Bessemer and Lake Erie, going up to shipping ports on Lake Erie, and it went overseas. West led to Montour No. 4 mine, further through Cecil, and then on to Champion cleaning plant near Imperial. Siding was added to the library junction to temporarily store hopper cars coming to or from Montour mine No. 10. And due to the steep hill and the sharp curves on the library branch, often the trains, especially the loaded ones, would have to what they call double or even triple the hill. They could bring only some of their loads up in one trip and then would have to go back for the remaining cars. This siding ran from the original main line along the east leg of the Y behind the horse farm to near the Churchill Road Bridge. On the other side of the Churchill Road was the short Gaffney Spur, which allowed the Montour to deliver supplies to a couple businesses at the site of the current bus and construction companies. Halfway down the hill toward Library, Montour crossed into a small slice of Bethel Park and then into South Park Township. The Library branch was later extended through South Park to a connection with the B&O Railroad at Snowden. This is the Montour coming from down the Piney Fork Valley, and this is a double-track B&O railroad that it connected with there. Then extending even further past that area along the former Pennsylvania Railroad Peters Creek branch, the route is now used by the Montour Trail as its main route to connect with the Great Allegheny Passage Trail in Clairton. So that's kind of the end of the tour in Peters, except for one other location that's not on the actual railroad, and this is the Montour History Room. We have a display up here you can take a look at and later and see, gives you an idea of what we have over there. This has memorabilia and artifacts on display. We're located in the Venetia Community Center. The History Room is open whenever the Dare Model Railroad Club is in session, which is currently Wednesday afternoons from 3 to 6 and Saturday mornings. So stop by and check it out, along with the Dare Model Railroad Club's layouts as well. We have a big layout that emulates the Montour Railroad there, as well as we have four classrooms full of model railroads. So that's basically the end of the tour. We have a chair for you, so we can get you there. That's basically it. Questions?
Do you know anything about the turntable? What was on the Montour,
The
were
Mon-
they over in McDonald? I haven't been able to find much about that, other than I have one book that mentions it.
There was not a turntable on the Montour Railroad.
Wasn't it on the
No.
Montour?
It may have been part of the Pennsylvania Railroad that ran through McDonald, which is now the Panhandle Trail.
Yeah.
That was Pennsylvania Railroad.
One of
Yeah.
the ladies told me her husband grew up in turntable, and she was telling me about it. That's why I
Okay.
wanted to know if it was the Montour
Yeah.
or if it was.
No, the Montour had several Y tracks like the one at Library Junction. There was also one right outside of Imperial at North Star. And then down at Montour Junction, they could turn trains there, but yeah. But they basically kept all the trains headed west, because when they pulled into Montour Junction, into the servicing facilities, that was the direction they wanted them to be. So even in the steam days, the trains would operate in reverse,
Yeah.
basically, for miles and miles, because there was nowhere to
Well, I've
turn
read
them
some-
around.
I've read some newspaper articles, just like when I did research a little on Cecil, but of how they had like an explosion over in
Mhm.
Venice because they were trying to warm the stuff, keep warm while they were working, building the railroad and that. And my dad's sister, they don't know where she's buried in the one cemetery, because when the railroad Montour came through, they kind of used some of the property that was in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And they think that she's buried underneath where the railroad is. And the records are all gone. They don't know. There's quite a few of them burials they don't know. They believe they're on the railroad.
That could be. Anybody else? Yes?
The coal haul the coal that came from the mine.
Yep.
None of it was used locally, nothing went to any power plants locally, it was all elsewhere.
Some of it was used went to the steel mills, especially in the early days. Most of it went elsewhere. In the 70s, two of the biggest clients was Mohawk Power Company, which is Rochester, New York. They got a lot of coal. Like I said, some of it went on the Bessemer and Lake Erie and went up to shipping ports on Lake Erie and were loaded into ships and actually went overseas. So, but that being said, yes, there was some local.
What was the gauge on the Montour? Wasn't it?
It's standard gauge.
I'm sorry?
It's standard gauge. It was, yeah, there was no narrow gauge. The only narrow gauge would be the actual mine railroads.
So they blended right in with the other rails.
Yeah. Yes?
When did they convert from steam to diesel engines? Probably a gradual process.
It took several years. First diesels were basically 1949 and 50, and they bought 3 of them. And then over the next 2 years, they bought 9 more. They ended up with 12. Steam was phased out. It was still in use a little bit into the early 50s. The last steam was done in 1952. Yes?
Since you're familiar with the whole Montour Trail,
Yep.
is there any thoughts ever of going to Irish Town and crossing over? It looks like there probably could be something continuing the Czech Trail or Irish Town at the end there in Bethel.
We're used to.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It looks like, you know.
Yeah, it stops now at Logan Road.
Correct.
Right.
Is there ever?
And originally it continued
Correct.
on through Bethel and went all the way over to, used to be Duke's Diner, it's now a brewery, the microbrewery over on, over on the other side of the township there, and on its way to West Mifflin. The Peters, or the Bethel Park Friends Group is actively pursuing reinstating that trail. They have a lot of problems because several bridges were taken out, and so now you're facing a lot of grade road crossings, which we don't like on the trail, and so it's that becomes a safety issue. So they have a lot of work to do. Fortunately, the township is at least behind them in trying to get this done. I don't know if they're actually providing any financial assistance, but they're at least good with the concept of trying to get the trail to go over to from Logan Road where it ends now, and get it over into Millennial Park. So, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
That same area where she's talking about,
Uh-huh.
is there a mine by Irish Town Road there?
Yeah, Coverdale was basically in where the industrial park is now. And if you go down Industrial Boulevard, down through that park, that's basically where the tracks ran for the mine. It was Montour went through there and gave access to that mine, but the Montour did not service Coverdale. West Side Belt Railroad had trackage rights, and they came in from over at Longview, and they would come in and service the mine and ship the coal out in a different direction. It was not actually shipped on the Montour, although it did use some Montour tracks.
Is there some, like, an abutment there right before the parking lot at mile marker 39?
Yeah.
And it looks like something with a mine or something,
Yeah. Yes.
Is it the Montour Trail, does that go all the way down to 51?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes all the way it actually crosses 51 and goes all the way to Clairton, where they have it hook up with the Great Allegheny Passage trails.
There's probably no plans to ever cross 51 bridge.
There are. That's a very active.
Suicide.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's why Bethel Park's section is going to be such a problem. But yes, they've been trying to figure out how to do it. Of course, they need state approval because it's a state road, so you have to have PennDOT sign off on everything. And they've been trying for years to figure out how to get across 51. And right now it's one of the top projects that they're involved in. I don't know how close they're going to be. They're slowly making some progress through the South Park area. There's a couple of places down through there that are still a few little gaps in the trail, and we're baby stepping along, and so we'll get there eventually, we hope. Yes.
When we hear the trains running, we live close to Valley Brook Road.
Okay.
We hear the trains running. Where are those trains at right now? You know where the area that is?
That's the line that it's Pittsburgh and Ohio Central operates that line now. It used to be Pittsburgh Industrial Railroad for those that go back 20 years. It goes from Carnegie down through Cannonsburg, through Houston, and it goes down to Washington. There's a plastics factory right near the Washington County Fairgrounds, and they send hopper cars full of plastic pellets down there. It goes 3 days a week. One train, usually 10:30 in the morning, goes south, and it does its business, and then it comes back usually around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. They also service the big transformer plant that's in Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania Transformer. They ship some items out of there once or twice a month. But yeah, that's probably the one you hear. There's also the Wheeling and Lake Erie that runs out through Cecil Township and goes basically from Bridgeville kind of out along Route 50 and out through Cecil and then eventually goes over into Ohio. And that one you can, depending on the conditions, sometimes you hear that one as well. Yep. Yep. Yeah, the old Venetia School. There is. Yeah, that's active. That's the Allegheny Valley Railroad. And that goes down into Washington and services some facilities there. They go They go once every weekday. Yep, we see them, and the kids, when the kids are there, we're always looking for the train to come, and fortunately it doesn't run on the weekends, so when we're there on Saturday mornings, we don't see it. But if we're there on the weekdays, and sometimes on Wednesday afternoon, if they're a little bit late, then we'll see them come by.
What's that lamp? One with the shade?
One on the far end with the shade is a caboose lamp. It's an oil lamp, but it was used in the cabooses. The bracket, we can come up and look at it when we're
Yeah,
done
that
here.
one I saw.
The bracket that you see there is spring loaded. It mounts on the wall and then it's spring loaded. It acts like a shock absorber. So when the caboose hits into some other cars, it doesn't rattle the lamp enough to break the globe. Yeah. Yes.
The stops in Peters Township, you mentioned they stopped at the McMurray Supply Company.
Yep.
And then at the Montour number 4.
Right.
Where else did they stop in Peters Township?
What is now St. Petersburg Center along Valley Brook Road was a lumber supply company.
What was the name of that? Was it Easton?
What, I'm sorry?
Was it the Easton Lumber Supply?
Yes, yes. But they were mostly millwork. It wasn't raw lumber to build houses, but they would supply doors, windows, that kind of stuff. And they had a spur off the Montour, and they were serviced at times, not steadily, but they were serviced at times by the
So those
Montour.
3 stops were all along the same line?
Yes.
So there weren't any stops going to South Park?
South Park,
That-
the only thing over that way would have been that Gaffney spur where the bus company and the construction company is along Churchill Road there. There was also a lumber called Green Hills Lumber. There was a lumber yard there that got serviced by the Montour. There was a spur track that went into that lot at one time.
So was that 2 lines then that went through Peters Township? 2 separate lines?
No, really just one. Well, because of the library junction behind the horse farm, the railroad in Peters has 3 ends to it. So it came from Chartiers Creek and basically went over into Bethel Park, was the main line, and then behind the horse farm it diverged off and went down over the hill into library. So that was considered a branch line for the railroad. It's the main trail line.
Thank you.
So yeah, it had 3 ends, if that makes any sense. Yes, sorry.
On the Arrowwood Trail,
Right?
probably until about 10 years ago, there was an old shack, and a man lived in there. And I used to see him come out, he had an old car, and he would drive along, and I guess eventually access Valley Brook and go to the store, just to look like an old hermit. And then it was taken down.
Yes.
But I thought, I was told, was that a stop, or a service stop on the railroad?
No, that, up from McMurray Road is what you're talking about. It's an empty lot now. Yeah, that was the turkey farm. And it was, for a long, many years, it was a turkey farm. That's what they did there. And that driveway that now comes up from Brush Run Veterinary parking lot was used. That was the one where the guys tried to dump the truck in the ditch. Was where that crossing was made. Yeah. But yeah, he was there for quite a while. That property was sold and the buildings were taken down. I understand they were talking about building a house there, but obviously nothing has happened yet. So maybe one of these days we'll get a house there. Yes?
I was just going to share a little bit. My brother is working up in Erie for WabTech, and I don't know if you've seen that listed in the papers. There was some articles in Pittsburgh paper regarding that. They are working on, he actually is on the, what do you call it, the design team for an all-electric trains now.
Oh, okay.
So it's really it's taking off amazingly. But I'm thinking it never stops, does it? I guess it's nice to see that the trains are still going to be around.
Yes.
You know, that they're preserving the use of trains.
It's still a very efficient way of moving a lot of freight. And it's just like barges and big ships, the more freight you can move in one unit, if you will, then the cheaper it becomes. And so a train can typically now, like trains between here and Harrisburg, the freight trains that you see are over 100 cars long. And so that's a lot of material and merchandise that they're moving with just basically 2 or 3 locomotives. Yeah.
Did we ever have any passenger trains in this area?
I'm sorry, what?
Did we ever have any passenger trains?
Yeah, the Montour ran passenger trains from shortly after its inception. The passenger service ended in 1927. So they did run passengers as far as here and over into Bethel Park. There were a couple of stops in Peters. One, and basically they were flag stops is what it really was. So it's, it's like when you catch the bus or some places where you catch the trolley, you go out and stand there, and when the train comes, you give him a wave and he stops, But there was a quote, real station over off of the end of Valley Brook Road, just after you cross Chartiers Creek into Cecil, and before you go up the hill into Lawrence. Off to the right, there's a yellow brick house sits back from the roadway, which was actually built by one of the Montour engineers, lived there. And then kind of behind that house, back closer to where Chartiers Creek is, there was a station. It was called Hills Station. And that's where and Hills Station was named, not because it was sitting on hills, it was named for a supervisor of the mining company. It was named Hills, and that's why it became Hills Station. Yes?
So Bethel Park end of this trail.
Yep.
It ends at Logan Road there.
Right.
It goes behind Brookwood down to Industrial Boulevard.
Yep.
It goes over by Kiefer.
Yes.
Over there.
Yep. Past the municipal building.
Past municipal, and then goes across the 88 down there where the old Allegheny Works used to be.
Yep.
Where did it cross South Park Road back towards Industrial?
South Park Road was, it's basically where Industrial Boulevard comes out. There's a traffic light.
Yes.
If coming from here, it was just before that traffic light.
Okay.
You can still kind of see that, and there's a house on the left-hand side with a white, I'll say picket fence, but I think it's some kind of a white board fence, and the railroad basically ran right along that fence line.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it went back through. That's where it gets to. It's a long way to go by car. But when you go down the railroad, Kiefer's only a few hundred yards beyond that point. So, yeah. And then it went on over into, like I say, it crossed where the old Duke Station restaurant was, and crossed 88 where the old Allegheny County Works
right there.
building. Yeah. I guess that's gone now. I haven't been over that way for a while. Yeah. Did they tear the building down? I think. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
What happened to Montour Railroad? I think you mentioned it, the financial. It's obviously, mine shut down, is that what it's called?
Basically, the mines played out, the traffic went down. Originally, the railroad was owned by the coal company. It was started by the Imperial Coal Company. And then when Pittsburgh Coal, which became Consolidated Coal, which became Consol Energy, right at the 1900s, they bought up about 70 mines and consolidated the operations into their system. And they still owned the railroad up until 1946. And at that point, it was sold to combination of the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie and the Pennsylvania railroads to get it off their books. Those two railroads ran the Montour for, blanking on the date now, into the 60s. And the deal was kind of an odd deal because each of these parent railroads would operate the Montour for 6 months at a time. So for 6 months, the Pennsylvania Railroad and their management would run the Montour. And then whatever the date was, well, for simplicity, July 1, then the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie took over and they ran it for the rest of the year. So they did that for a while, and then the Pennsylvania Railroad eventually, especially when they went through bankruptcy and went into the Conrail years and the Penn Central years, they sold their part of the Montour to the P&LE. So the P&LE owned it at the end. And they're the ones that basically closed it down because there was no traffic. They closed it down kind of in sections. There were, as some of the mines either ran out or some of the traffic, the P&LE could route over their own rails instead of the Montour. So even though it was taking it from one pocket and putting it in the other, the profits all went onto the P&LE books instead of the Montour.
Well, thank you
Okay.
all so much, and thank you to Bryan.
So we have that there's some displays up here for some of the trail brochures and things. We have the memorabilia displays up here, so check them out. This is a hands-on display. So if you want to pick something up and look at it, leaf through the books, do whatever you want, it's hands-on and go for it.